Hello, dear listener. Have you ever felt that a well-known story has a hidden layer, waiting just beneath the surface? That is the world we will explore together on this channel. Welcome to a space where we give classic tales a second life. We will take stories from our shared cultural heritage, fairy tales, parables, historical events, and view them through a modern, thoughtful lens. This is not just about retelling, it's about rediscovery. We'll uncover the deeper lessons about human nature, society, and wisdom that have been there all along, transforming simple narratives into tools for cultivating our imagination, education, and cultural awareness. Our journey begins with a fresh perspective on a classic you all know, The Cat's House. I promise you will never see it the same way again. If you're curious to see where this path leads, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell to join our community of curious minds. And if you have a friend who appreciates a good story told well, please share this video with them. Let's build this community together. I can't wait to embark on this journey of discovery with you. Part 1. The Gilded Cage. The twilight was not merely a time of day in that particular part of the world. It was a presence. It crept over the cobblestone streets, painting the sky in shades of lavender and deep blue, and it found its most willing captive in a house that was not so much a home as it was a jewel box. And in that jewel box lived a cat. Her name was Vasilisa, and she was a creature of such exquisite refinement that the very air around her seemed to hesitate before daring to touch her luxuriant ginger-orange fur. She was not just a cat, she was a lady, a dowager of considerable means and immeasurable pride. Her house was a marvel. A 3-story confection of carved wood and stained glass, with a roof that curved like the spine of a contented feline, and a chimney that puffed out smoke in polite pearlescent rings. On this evening, as the first stars pricked the velvet sky, every window of Vasilisa's home blazed with golden light. From within spilled not noise, but the sophisticated murmur of a gathering, the crystalline ting of a spoon against a porcelain cup, the low hum of cultivated conversation, the gentle sigh of a violin from a gramophone. For Vasilisa was receiving guests. Her parlour was a testament to her taste. Plush velvet divans the colour of crushed cherries, shelves groaning under the weight of leather-bound books that no one ever read, and a grand fireplace where logs of fragrant applewood crackled, not for heat, but for ambience. On the mantelpiece 2 porcelain figurines, a prim poodle in a wig, and a haughty goat with a monocle stood as silent, judgmental sentinels. Vasilisa herself reclined on a silk cushion, her tail curled neatly around her paws. She was regaling her company, the portly, self-important goat, Kuzma, and his eternally fluttering wife, Zoya. They nibbled on marzipan fruits and sipped elderberry wine, their conversation a dance of empty pleasantries and veiled boasts. "My dear Vasilisa," Kuzma bleated, adjusting his monocle, "this wine is adequate, though it lacks the certain terroir of the vintage I imported from the South Vineyards last Tuesday." "You are too kind, Kuzma Petrovich," Vasilisa purred, her green eyes half closed in amusement. "But one must make do. The true delicacies, she said, gesturing with a paw towards a silver platter of smoked salmon canapes, are so frightfully difficult to acquire these days. It seems everyone is simply eating nowadays, with no thought for the art of dining. Zoya the goat nodded vigorously, her ribbons trembling. Oh, indeed, a tragedy. Commonality is simply ruining everything. They spoke of art, of music, of the sheer inconvenience of having to acknowledge the existence of a world beyond their lace curtains. They were warm, bathed in firelight and self-satisfaction. They were, in every sense of the word, in. But outside the circle of that golden light, just beyond the frozen garden, another world existed, a world the cat and her guests chose not to see. Shivering in the deep shadow cast by Vasilis's magnificent house were two small, thin figures, two kittens, orphans, their fur matted and their eyes huge with a hunger that was more than just for food. They huddled together for warmth, their tiny breaths forming faint ghosts in the bitter air. The larger one, a black scrap of night with one white sock, was Thomas. The smaller, a delicate tortoise shell, was his sister Sasha. Thomas pressed his nose against the cold glass of the window pane, his worlding to the spectacle of warmth within. He watched the cat laugh, a soft, tinkling sound that didn't reach his ears but was clear in the shake of her shoulders. "Look, Sasha," he whispered, his voice raspy. "They have a fire, a real one, and food on silver plates." Sasha, trembling, tried to pull him back. "Don't, Thomas, it's not for us. Remember last time." But Thomas couldn't look away. The sight of that warmth, that plenty, was a physical ache in his empty belly. It was a promise of a life he could scarcely imagine. He took a deep breath, his small chest puffing out with a courage born of desperation. She's our aunt, after all. A distant aunt, but family is family. She has to see us. She has to help. Before Sasha could stop him, Thomas raised a small shaking paw and knocked on the window pane. It was a feeble sound, a tiny tap, 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 like a pebble dropping into a deep well, utterly insignificant against the grand symphony of the party inside. Yet for a moment, the music within seemed to skip. The cat's head turned, her elegant neck arched. Those luminous green eyes, which moments before had been soft with wine and vanity, now sharpened. They focused not with recognition or pity, but with the cold, dismissive clarity of one looking at a smudge on a pristine window. The moment of truth had arrived at the cat's door, not as a welcomed guest, but as a faint, desperate tapping from the cold dark outside. Part 2. A cold wind at the door. The tapping, faint as it was, had created a tiny fracture in the bubble of the party. The violin melody from the gramophone scratched to a halt. Kuzma the goat, mid-sentence about the inferior quality of northern hay, fell silent, his jaw working soundlessly. Zoya clutched her pearls, a string of painted wooden beads, as if they were under immediate threat. All eyes, wide with a mixture of curiosity and affront, turned towards the window. There, illuminated by the very light they coveted, were two small, pitiable faces. Their eyes, enormous in their thin faces, shone with a desperate hope that was already beginning to curdle into fear. Vasilisa's expression did not change into a frown. That would have required too much undignified effort. Instead, it simply cooled. The pleasant amusement drained from her features, leaving behind a mask of polished, icy composure. She uncoiled herself from her cushion with a sigh that spoke of immense personal inconvenience. "My apologies," she purred to her guests, her voice like smooth silk. "It appears we have spectators. Do enjoy the wine. I shall deal with this interruption." She glided across the Persian rug, her tail held high like a banner of her unassailable status. Every step was a study in grace and annoyance. She did not march to the door, she proceeded towards it, a queen reluctantly descending from her throne to address a mundane matter of state. The kittens outside saw her approach. A flicker of renewed hope sparked in Thomas's chest. "See, Sasha, she's coming. I told you she would." But Sasha, wiser and more wary, only shrank back further into the shadows, her tiny heart hammering against her ribs. Vasilisa did not open the main door. Instead, she went to a smaller secondary window that could be latched open just a crack, a design feature seemingly made for precisely this kind of distasteful interaction. She unlatched it, and a sliver of the freezing night air, sharp as a knife, sliced into the warm, perfumed room. "Yes?" Vasilisa's voice was now devoid of its purring warmth. It was flat, polite, and colder than the wind itself. "What is it?" Thomas, bolstered by desperation, found his voice. "Auntie Cat, good evening. It's us, your nephews. We're so cold, and we haven't eaten in a long time. We saw your beautiful fire and thought, perhaps you might have a spare corner by the hearth, just for a little while, and maybe a crust of bread." His words tumbled out in a rushed, shivering plea. A silence followed, broken only by the crackle of the applewood fire and the nervous shuffling of the goats inside. Vasilisa looked down at them. She did not see family. She did not see suffering. She saw a disruption. She saw two muddy, common creatures who had the audacity to lay claim to her attention and, worse, her hospitality. "Nephews," she repeated, as if tasting a strange and unpleasant word. "My dear child, you must be mistaken. My family tree is well documented and notably unblemished. I have no recollection of any street relations." Her words were precise, each one a small, perfectly formed ice chip aimed at their hearts. But our mother," Sasha piped up, her voice a mere whisper, "is undoubtedly waiting for you elsewhere," Vasilisa interrupted, her tone final. "It is late, far too late for well-bred kittens to be wandering about. You should run along home immediately." Thomas's hope finally shattered. "We have no home," he cried out, the truth ripped from him by her cruelty. "It burned down. We have nowhere to go." For a fraction of a second something flickered in the cat's eyes. Not pity, but something closer to superstitious alarm. The mention of fire, of burning, was a bad omen, an unpleasant topic that had no place in her elegant parlour. It was vulgar. A tragedy, to be sure, she said, her voice even more distant, as if she were already closing a book on the matter. But I am entertaining esteemed guests. This is hardly the time for tragic stories. Now, if you will excuse me, I must return to my company. Do try to find a barn somewhere. I've heard they are accommodating. And with that she closed the little window. The latch clicked shut with the sound of terrifying finality. She turned her back, a smooth, impassive wall of orange fur, and walked away from the window, away from their frozen, disbelieving faces. The golden light from the house seemed to dim for the kittens, not physically, but in its meaning. It was no longer a symbol of warmth and hope, but of exclusion and a cruelty they were too young to fully understand. Inside, Vasilisa rejoined her guests with a light, dismissive flick of her tail. Where were we? Ah, yes, Kuzma Petrovich. You were describing the terroir of your hay. Do continue. The music started again. The laughter, after a hesitant pause, resumed. The world inside the jewel box had righted itself, having neatly disposed of an unpleasantness. Outside, in the deepening cold, the two kittens stood for a moment longer, watching the shadows of the figures inside dance and laugh. The wind, now feeling crueler than ever, whipped around them. They had been refused not just shelter and food, but acknowledgement. They had been erased. Thomas, his pride wounded and his belly hollow, finally turned away. "Come on, Sasha," he muttered, his voice thick with shame he didn't deserve to feel. "We're not wanted here." And together they stumbled back into the darkness, leaving the island of light and laughter behind, swallowed whole by the hungry, uncaring night. Part 3. The Pride Before the Fall. The party within the cat's house did not merely continue. It swelled, as if the dismissal of the kittens had been a necessary aperitif to sharpen the appetite for merriment. The air grew thicker with the scent of spiced wine and self-congratulation. Vasilisa, having performed her duty of safeguarding her home's exclusivity, was now the radiant centre of her small universe. She regaled the goats with a story, a paw delicately raised for emphasis. "And so I told the merchant," she said, a sly smile playing on her whiskers. "My good man, if I wished to have a rug of ordinary quality, I would have gone to the market. I do not go to the market. The market, in all its noisy commonality, must come to me, and it must be silent while it does so. You should have seen his face." Kuzma the goat let out a wheezing laugh that ended in a cough. "Oh, superb, simply superb. To know one's own worth, that is the mark of true nobility." "It is a burden," Vasilisa sighed with profound satisfaction, refilling their glasses, "but one must bear it with grace." Meanwhile, her servants, a cock and a hen, fluttered nervously between the parlour and the kitchen. They were efficient and quiet, but their eyes met with worried glances. They had seen the kittens at the window. The hen, especially. Her motherly instincts stirred, had clucked softly in dismay at her mistress's coldness, but she was too timid to say a word. As the night wore on, the fire in the grand fireplace began to wane. The elegant apple-wood logs had burned down to a bed of glowing embers. "Kuzma Petrovich," Vasilisa said, "would you be a darling? The fire needs tending. A fresh log, if you please. The finest one from the stack by the fireplace." Flattered to be entrusted with such a task, the goat puffed out his chest. "But of course, my dear, a man's duty after all." He strode importantly to the fireplace, selected a large, handsome log, and with a grunt heaved it onto the embers. But Kuzma was portly, and his eyesight, despite the monocle, was poor. He did not see that as he dragged the log, a single glowing ember, a tiny fiery seed, was dislodged from the hearth. It tumbled out, landing unnoticed on the edge of the long silken train of Vasilisa's gown. For a moment the ember merely smouldered, a tiny red eye winking in the shadows, drinking in the oxygen and the expensive dry fabric. The cat, meanwhile, was showing Zoya her collection of porcelain miniatures. "This one," she murmured, "is a family heirloom. They say my great-great-grandpa caught a mouse for Catherine the Great. A very discerning mouse, I'm told. It was the hen who saw it first. Her sharp eyes caught the wisp of smoke curling from the hem of Vasilisa's gown. She let out a startled squawk. 'Madam! Oh, madam! Your dress!' Vasilisa looked down, her expression one of mild irritation at the interruption. Then she saw it. The smoulder had caught. A tiny flame, no bigger than a needle, had sprung to life, eagerly tasting the fine silk. A gasp went through the room. For a second elegance held. Then primal panic broke through. "Fire!" Kuzma bleated, his voice a terrified shriek. He stumbled backward, knocking over a small table laden with crystal glasses. They shattered on the floor like falling ice. Elegance dissolved into chaos. Vasilisa shrieked, a sound utterly devoid of her former purring grace, and began to frantically beat at the flame with her paws. But her movements were frantic, clumsy. She only succeeded in fanning it. The flame leapt from her gown to the fringe of the velvet divan, which greeted it like an old friend. The fire, once a contained and decorative asset, had become a predator. It was no longer contained. It raced along the dry wood of the walls, climbed the silk curtains as if they were ladders to heaven, and began to devour the room with a terrifying, roaring hunger. "My paintings, my carpets," Vasilisa wailed, now utterly transformed, her fur standing on end, her ears wild with terror. "My monocle!" screamed Kuzma, who had already lost his in the chaos. "My pearls!" Zoya echoed, though they were still clutched tightly in her hoof. There was no thought of saving anything else. The cock and the hen fled out the back door, squawking warnings into the night. The goats, with a strength born of sheer terror, bolted through the front, not even looking back. Vasilisa was the last to escape. She stumbled out onto the frost-hardened ground, bare-pawed, her fur smudged with soot, her magnificent gown ruined. She stood there, shivering violently, not from the cold, but from shock, and watched. She watched as her beautiful house, her jewel box, her entire world was consumed. The windows glowed not with golden lamplight, but with the hellish, dancing orange of the inferno within. The stained glass shattered from the heat. The carved wooden porch groaned and collapsed with a sound like a dying beast. The roof, that proud, curved spine, gave way, sending a volcano of sparks shooting into the cold, indifferent sky. Within what felt like moments, everything was gone. All that remained was a blackened, smouldering skeleton against the night, the occasional flame still licking at a remnant of a beam like a cruel afterthought. The warmth she had so jealously guarded, the riches she had flaunted, the status she had prized above all else, it had all turned to ash and smoke. She was left with nothing, absolutely nothing. She was no longer Vasilisa, the proud lady of the house. She was just a cat, a cold, hungry, homeless cat, alone in the vast dark night. The wind, which had once been kept at bay by her walls, now bit through her fur with mocking familiarity. She had turned away 2 kittens for fear of their need. Now, the universe had turned her into one of them. Part 4. The Bitter Road of Refuge. Vasilia stood frozen, a statue of ash and despair, watching the final embers of her life die in the pre-dawn gloom. The cold was no longer just around her. It had seeped into her very bones, a chilling void where her pride used to reside. But she was not entirely alone. A figure emerged from the shadows, moving with a quiet, hesitant grace. It was a sleek, grey cat with intelligent yellow eyes, and a demeanour of quiet dignity, even now. This was Vincent, her companion. Not a husband, not a servant, but a quiet partner who had shared her home, her conversations and her solitude. He was a scholar of sorts, a reader of books from her shelves, and his loyalty was as deep and silent as the night. "Vasilisa," he said, his voice low and calm, a stark contrast to the crackling ruin before them. He did not touch her. He simply stood beside her, sharing the sight of the devastation. "We cannot stay here. The dawn will bring curiosity, and we're in no state to receive it." She turned to him, her green eyes wide with a lost, uncomprehending pain. "Vincent, everything. It's all—" "I know," he said softly, "but we're alive. That is the foundation upon which we must now build. Come." His practicality was a lifeline. Numbly she allowed him to lead her away from the ashes. They became 2 shadows slinking through the back alleys of the waking town, their fur matted with soot, their paws cold and sore on the frozen ground. The first order of business was clear. They needed shelter. And so began a journey of the most profound and humiliating instruction. Their first stop was a sturdy, respectable-looking house with a neat fence and a warm light in the kitchen window, the home of Kuzma and Zoya, the goats. Vincent, ever the diplomat, did the knocking. The door opened a crack, revealing Kuzma's suspicious eye and the tip of Zoya's nose. "Kuzma Petrovich," Vincent began, his tone respectful. "As you can see, a terrible tragedy has befallen us. Vasilisa's house is lost. We humbly ask for a corner in your hayloft, just for the night, to escape the cold." The door opened a little wider. The goats looked them up and down, taking in their dishevelled, soot-streaked state. Kuzma's face, which had so recently been flushed with wine and laughter in Vasilisa's parlour, now wore an expression of pinched disapproval. "A tragedy indeed! A most terrible, fiery tragedy," Kuzma bleated, his voice lacking any real sympathy. "But hayloft? My dear Vincent, our hayloft is accounted for, every strand. It is a very specific, high-quality hay, you understand. It cannot be disturbed by foreign elements. The soot, the smell of smoke. It would ruin the entire batch. We simply cannot risk it." Zoya nodded vigorously from behind him. "Oh, yes. It would be unhygienic, and our nerves are so fragile after the shock of tonight. We need our rest. Perhaps try the poodle. She has that large kennel." And with that the door was shut, not with a slam, but with a firm, final click. Vasilisa stared at the closed door, a new kind of cold settling in her heart. These were the same creatures who had praised her wine and her wit just hours before. Next they went to the house of the poodle, the prim porcelain figurine come to life. She came to the window, wearing a lacy nightcap, her curls in papers. "Mon Dieu!" she exclaimed upon seeing them. "You look dreadful. What has happened?" Vincent explained again, his patience wearing thin but his manners impeccable. The poodle gave a dramatic shudder. "To lose one's home! Quelle horreur! But my dear things, my kennel is, how do you say, a mess, an absolute disaster, and my pedigree, my reputation, to have guests of indeterminate cleanliness. Non, non, c'est impossible. The gossip alone would be the end of me. Désolé." The window closed. They tried the pig, who lived in a cosy, muddy cottage. She opened the door, chewing on a potato peel, and listened. "Aye, fire's a terrible thing," she grunted. "But look at ye. No offence, but ye track ash all over me clean floors, and I've a dozen little ones to feed. No room at the trough, see? Not even for a skinny pair like ye." Door closed. At every door the story was the same. The cat and her companion were met with averted eyes, weak excuses, and outright refusal. Their former friends offered nothing but empty words and closed doors. The warmth and plenty they had so recently enjoyed in Vasilisa's house were now guarded from her with a miser's zeal. Vasilisa walked in a daze of disbelief. Each refusal was a hammer blow to the remains of her pride. She, who had turned away 2 small kittens without a second thought, was now being turned away by everyone she knew. The irony was so bitter, so perfect, it felt like a divine punishment. She stopped finally, her paws aching, her spirit broken. She looked at Vincent, her eyes filled with the despair he had never seen in them before. They all said no," she whispered, her voice raw. "Every single one. After all the wine I served them, after all the fine words." Vincent looked at her, his yellow eyes filled not with "I told you so," but with a deep, weary sadness. "Yes, Vasilisa," he said quietly. "It appears that the worth of a friend is only measured by the worth of your fireplace. Now that it is gone, so are they." They stood there, 2 shivering figures in the middle of the empty cold street, utterly and completely alone. The world had become a vast, unfriendly place, and they had nowhere left to knock. Part 5. The Only Light in the Darkness. The night seemed to stretch on forever, a vast, cold expanse of rejection. Vasilisa and Vincent wandered the outskirts of the town, their steps dragging, their breath pluming in the air like ghosts of their former selves. The grand houses were all behind them, their doors firmly shut. Ahead lay only the open fields and the forest, a prospect as bleak as their future. It was Vincent who saw it first. A faint flickering glow, not the fierce, devouring orange of the fire that had consumed their home, but a soft, warm, golden light. It came from a small, humble structure half buried in the side of a hill, a zemlyanka, an earth house. Its roof was sod, with little chimneys made of baked clay, from which a thin, welcoming wisp of smoke curled into the night air. It was the home of the kittens. Vasilisa stopped dead in her tracks. The memory of their pinched, hopeful faces at her window, of her own cold words, washed over her like a wave of physical shame. She recoiled. "No, Vincent," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Not there. Anyone but them. I cannot." Vincent turned to her. His grey fur made him almost invisible in the darkness, but his yellow eyes were 2 steady beacons. "Vasilisa," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "we have knocked on every door of pride and found them locked. The only door left is the one of humility. We have no other path." He was right, and she knew it. The thought of facing those she had so recently scorned was an agony worse than cold, but the alternative was to freeze to death in the wilderness, proud and alone. Slowly, her head bowed so low her whiskers brushed the frosty grass, she followed him. They approached the low door. There was no grand porch, no stained glass. The window was small, but the light from within was real and warm. Vincent took a deep breath and knocked, not a loud, demanding rap, but a soft, hesitant tap. For a moment there was silence. Then, the sound of a small bolt being drawn back. The door opened, and a wave of warmth, smelling of baked earth and simple herbs, washed over them. In the doorway stood Thomas, the black kitten. He held a small, homemade candle, its flame guttering in the draught. His eyes widened, first in surprise, then in confusion. He looked past them, as if expecting to see a grand entourage. Aunt Cat, he stammered. What are you doing here? Sasha appeared behind him, her small face peering out from behind his shoulder. Her eyes, too, went wide with shock. Vasilisa could not speak. The words stuck in her throat, choked by shame and cold. It was Vincent who answered, his head bowed. Thomas, Sasha, he said, his voice thick with an emotion he had not shown at any other door. A great misfortune has befallen us. Vasilisa's house. It burned to the ground. There is nothing left. He did not need to say more. The soot on their fur, the emptiness in their eyes, the utter lack of any belongings, it all told the story more eloquently than any words. The kittens were silent for a heartbeat, taking in the complete reversal of their worlds. Just hours ago, she had been a magnificent lady in a mansion, and they were beggars at her window. Now she stood on their threshold, a homeless supplicant. Thomas looked at Sasha. Sasha looked back at him. There was no conference, no whispered debate. There was only a shared innate understanding, a kindness that had not been extinguished by their own hardship. Thomas stepped back, pulling the door wide open. "Come in," he said, his voice clear and firm, devoid of any gloating or hesitation. "Please come in. You must be frozen." The simplicity of the offer, its sheer generosity, was like a physical blow to Vasilisa. She hesitated on the threshold, unable to cross it, overwhelmed by the magnitude of her own past cruelty. It was Sasha who reached out a small, gentle paw. "It's not much," she said softly, "but it's warm. And it's dry. And we have a little milk saved. Please share it with us." That broke her. A sob, harsh and ragged, escaped Vasilisa's throat. Tears, real tears that had not come even when she watched her house burn, now streamed down her sooty face, cutting clean paths through the ash. She stumbled across the threshold, not as a lady, but as a broken creature finally coming home. The earth house was one small room, humble and clean. A small fire crackled in a hearth made of stones. 2 tiny beds of straw were in the corner. It was the absolute opposite of her luxurious mansion, and yet, in that moment, it was the most beautiful, most welcoming place she had ever seen. She looked at the 2 kittens, these small beings who had nothing, yet offered everything they had without a second thought. And she finally understood. I'm so sorry," she choked out, the words raw and true. "I was so blind, so foolish. I had so much and shared nothing. You have so little, and you opened your door." Thomas just nodded, guiding her to the spot closest to the fire. Sasha was already fetching a small clay bowl of milk. Vincent entered last, closing the door against the cold night. He looked at the scene. The proud cat, humbled and weeping by the fire, being tended to by the kitten she had turned away. A quiet, profound peace settled in his heart. They had lost a house made of wood and riches, but they had found a home. Part 6. A new house, a true home. The days that followed were a lesson in a life Vasilisa had never known. Life in the Zemlyanka was not one of idle luxury, but of shared purpose. There was no one to serve them. They were all servants to the common goal of survival and comfort. And something miraculous began to happen. The ashes of the old house seemed to have washed away not just Vasilisa's possessions, but her pride. She learned to knead simple dough for bread, her once delicate paws now covered in flour. Vincent, with his thoughtful mind, proved adept at mending tools and strengthening the walls of their earthy abode. He showed Thomas how to weave a tighter thatch for the roof, while Vasilisa taught Sasha the names of herbs and how to dry them for tea. They worked. They truly worked. Not for appearance, but for each other. The kitten's boundless energy combined with the adult's experience turned their humble refuge into a place of genuine, bustling warmth. The simple stew tasted better than any gourmet dish because it was earned and shared. The warmth of the small hearth was deeper because it sheltered a family. One evening, as they sat around the fire, Vasilisa looked at her new family, the thoughtful Vincent, the earnest Tomas, the gentle Sasha, and spoke from the heart. "This earth has saved us," she said, her voice soft but clear. "It gave us shelter when the world of wood and stone turned us away. But a family needs room to grow. We need a new house, not a jewel box to be admired from the outside, but a true home, built by our own paws, to be loved from the inside." A spark of excitement lit in Tomas's eyes. A new house? But where? How? Vincent, who had been sketching idly in the dirt by the fire, smoothed a patch of earth and began to draw with a claw. "Here, on this very spot. We will build it together, not to impress the goats or the poodle, but for us. A house with a strong foundation, with a large kitchen where we can all cook, and with windows that look out on the garden we will plant together." The project united them completely. Vasilisa, with her refined taste, designed the intricate carvings that would adorn the window frames and porch, not as a show of wealth, but as a celebration of beauty, an art for art's sake. Vincent and Tomas became the lumberjacks and carpenters, felling trees and shaping beams with a strength they didn't know they possessed. Sasha and Vasilisa prepared the meals, tended the garden, and painted the shutters in bright, cheerful colours. Seasons turned. The snow melted, giving way to spring flowers, then to the full bloom of summer. And where the humble Zemlyanka had been, a new house rose. It was indeed a Terema beautiful wooden tower, adorned with carved rosettes, horses, and flowers that Vasilisa had designed. It was not as ostentatious as her old house, but it was infinitely warmer, more honest, and built with so much more than money. It was built with love and sweat. The door was never locked. One afternoon, the familiar figures of Kuzma and Zoya the goats happened to be passing by. They stopped, stunned by the sight of the new, handsome house and the well-tended garden. They saw Vasilisa, looking happier and healthier than they had ever seen her, laughing as she helped Sasha hang garlands of drying flowers. They saw Vincent and Thomas on the roof, putting the final touches on a beautifully carved weather vane. Kuzma cleared his throat, adjusting his monocle. Ahem! Vasilisa! What a quaint little house you've managed to put together. It must have been so difficult for you. Vasilisa turned and smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile that held no trace of her old malice or pride. Good day, Kuzma Petrovich, Zoya Petrovna. It was not difficult, it was a joy. For the first time I built something myself, and I built it with my true family. She did not invite them in. She simply turned back to her flowers. The goat stood there for a moment, awkward and excluded not by a closed door, but by an invisible wall of contentment that they could not penetrate. They shuffled away, muttering about the oddness of it all. Vasilisa watched them go, feeling not an ounce of anger or regret. She had learned the final lesson, to see the true worth of those around you, to value not the grandest gift from a miser, but the smallest crust from a generous heart, to cherish the joy of a shared task and the profound peace of a true home. She looked at Vincent, who waved from the roof, at Thomas, who was proudly polishing the new door handle, and at Sasha, who handed her another bunch of chamomiles. She had lost a house of things and gained a home of souls, and she knew with absolute certainty that no fire in the world could ever destroy this. A final reflection, and so the tale of the cat's house draws to a close, leaving us not just with a story, but with a quiet truth that lingers long after the final word is spoken. The fire that consumed Vasilisa's mansion did not merely reduce wood and silk to ash. It burned away the illusion of her world. It revealed the stark and simple difference between those who are drawn to the light of your hearth and those who truly value the warmth of your heart. Her former companions, the goat, the poodle, the pig, were but shadows, cast by the flickering flames of her wealth and status. When that light was extinguished, the shadows vanished without a trace. They were friends of circumstance, not of character. The true lesson, hard learned by Vasilisa, is that the value of a soul is not measured by the grandeur of its house, but by the openness of its door. It is a lesson in seeing beyond the surface, in recognizing the unwavering loyalty of a Vincent and the profound, unconditional kindness of the kittens she once deemed beneath her. Wealth is a fleeting guest, but a true family is the foundation upon which a lasting home is built. For a house filled with love, no matter how humble, is a palace. And a palace without it, no matter how grand, is ultimately just an empty, echoing shell. The greatest treasure one can ever possess is not gold in a chest, but the hands or paws that will tirelessly help you build your house anew when the old one has fallen. Our first story ends here, but not our journey. See you all in this same place.